have such sights to show you.
We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host Coale, and with me as always, I have my good friend and co-host Aaron. Aaron, I'm digging the flannel.
Oh, thanks.
It's very seasonal. What did you say?
Yeah, it's just a thing I put on today.
So, I hear you're getting ready for the Christmas season coming up.
I've got so many Christmases. Man.
Christmas for days.
Yeah. Christmas with my dad. I got Christmas with my girlfriend's family. I got Christmas with my mom. I got Christmas with my dog. Well,
Man.
I don't have a dog, but when I get one, we're gonna have another Christmas.
I know you're gonna have to make up several Christmases.
He's gonna have missed out. So you know.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. And speaking of dogs, there's a really cute one in this film we're about to watch.
Oh, really?
So we're watching the remake of The Thing from Another World, or as John Carpenter labeled it as, just The Thing, because with the original film, that's what they called it, just to shorten it up, is like, oh, The Thing's on. And so this remake, I don't know how much you are aware of it.
I'm actually like, I don't know. It's been a while, but I'm somewhat aware of it because I played a board game that was like a thing, and it's kind of like it's kind of like Mafia or something, or like Among Us.
Yes, it was called Who Goes There, which the movie was also based off of. So it was a novel that turned into a movie, and this is the remake of all of that movie.
Yeah. But like in the board game I played, you're like in a icy, like or Arctic science lab or some shit, and there's like a thing that can assume the shape of anyone. Yeah. So I assume that's what the movie's about. I assume the bad guy is some sort of shape shifting thing.
Yeah. So you're not too far off from there. You're pretty much right on the money there. Had you ever heard of anybody talk about this film in particular, like John Carpenter's The Thing?
No, literally,
Okay.
My only interaction with it was after completing that board game. Somebody that I was playing it with was like, "Isn't this based off that movie?" And I was like, "What? No, I've never heard of it."
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's no worries at all. For me, this was one of those films that I heard all about all the time. Like, it was just constantly like, oh man, John Carpenter's The Thing. Whoa, John Carpenter's The Thing. Like, it just was nonstop brought up in conversations, and I was late to the game to watching it just because it was one of those things like, yeah, I'll get around to doing it. And it's like the original film, I had planned on watching it before we recorded this episode, but just as you mentioned, kind of holidays coming up, my schedule's gotten completely busy to where I'm hoping to get this episode out on time. Let me know if you made a call.
Yes.
But yeah, with that being in mind, I also was waiting for the perfect opportunity to watch it, because I wanted to watch it on a day where it was really snowy outside and everything. And as you know, where we live, that doesn't happen too often there. So whenever it finally had a good snowfall, I'm like, okay, tonight's the night, perfect time. And I go in and watch it, and I'll let you know what I thought about it the first time watching it. But I am very curious to see whether my opinion changes watching it this time round. Because again, I'm going to go in with a different mindset going in than watching it the first time. So I'm very curious to see how it comes out. And it's crazy to think that this film is 40 years old already this year. So, which is crazy to call it a remake there. But, that's how the film business is, baby.
That's how they do.
But, yeah, so I won't give too much else away. We'll talk more about it later, and we'll be right back with y'all whenever we go watch John Carpenter's The Thing.
It's a noun.
It is.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
And we are back from watching John Carpenter's The Thing. So, Aaron, tell us about The Thing.
I'm starting to think that John Carpenter makes movies and is not a carpenter.
It was a missed opportunity. He should have been named John Director.
Yeah, I know. Really ignoring his calling there.
I know, it's ridiculous, man.
It was a great movie. It
Ooh.
was, it was fun. It was a mystery. Who did it? I think maybe it was the dog.
Oh my gosh. But that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good to hear. I'm glad that you kind of went into it much more favorably as opposed to like me whenever I watched it initially, I had gotten all this hype for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always have the belief that if I'm super hyped for a film, it just makes it that much harder for it to meet
To
my
live up to
expectations.
it, yeah.
And I think going into it this time round, it was a much more enjoyable experience for me. Not to say the first time was awful by any means, but now that I knew what to expect there, and I was able to pay attention to a lot of small stuff, because as you said, it's a mystery. I was engaged in it equally as I was the first time I watched it, if not more. There, kind of diving into everything with the film. So I'm glad that overall it's a pretty positive stuff so far, and we'll probably dig into more details as to what you really like about this film.
Yeah.
But for folks at home who don't know the general idea or plot of The Thing, as mentioned previously, it's a remake of The Thing from Another World, but the plot focuses on a group of Antarctica researchers who come across this Norwegian researchers chasing this dog in a helicopter, and they have no idea what's going on. The Norwegians are like losing their minds, firing guns, throwing grenades.
Only speaking Norwegianese, by the way.
Yes,
so
yes.
it's not like they can communicate. But
Yeah, zero way to communicate, and so once they resolve that situation, it's pretty much left there on what the heck is going on and why these Norwegians were losing their minds. And so that's pretty much how the film starts, and as the film continues on, you start to realize that whatever the Norwegians were worried about is soon going to be coming to threaten the American researchers here in Antarctica. And from there, it kind of dissolves into a whole big mystery and definitely builds up the suspense bit by bit there. So,
yeah.
I mean, I feel like I don't know the original source material as the movie before this or the book, but talking about it as a film, I mean, I think it's a solid idea for a mystery, just kind of like a whodunit, but it's not even one of those things where, you see like in a lot of like the murder films, and they have like the mystery stuff and they interrogate people, and one of the people is guilty. And so whenever you watch it, you're like, oh, well, that person's clearly lying or anything like that.
Right.
This one's weird in the fact that I feel like all of the actors play it completely straight. You don't feel like any of them are clearly lying. It's just almost on that level of just pretty much keeping it neutral, because even watching it the second time, watching everyone's performances, I never picked up any hints from anybody
Right.
on who's what and what they are. So I think plot-wise, I think it's perfectly strong, and I feel like it follows at a fairly even keel pace, I would say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, the pacing, right from the get-go, is like the dogs and the Norwegians, and they're shooting at the dog out of the helicopter, and they seem to just have crates of ammo in the back. It's just popping at this. And so, it doesn't waste any time giving you exposition of any of that shit. And then it's kind of pretty even pace from there. It's just like, all right, what the fuck is this? Oh, shit, this is happening, throughout the whole movie. Which is cool. And they even kind of drip in little bits of lore amid the action and the mystery, where they go and visit the Norwegian camp and they, see some of the discoveries that are related to the mystery. And I think it's cool that they have a pretty natural way to sort of world build, while at the same time keeping you in a very, very isolated place. There's no one outside of the, they're in the middle of Antarctica. Their help's not coming. You know what I mean? They have to figure this out on their own. But
No, they definitely. I think they tie up a lot of loose ends that a lot of times can be overlooked in horror films, which is nice. And I feel like whenever it does kind of give exposition to what this mysterious being is, I feel like it's not one of those things where they look at the camera like, oh, exposition, exposition, exposition.
Right.
Like, it feels like it's naturally trickled in there. It never feels like there's a moment of like, oh yeah, here's the part where they explain what it is.
Right.
It's just them naturally picking up the pieces, and you feel like they're making logical choices with the facts that are presented to them.
Yeah.
And they establish, like you mentioned before, that they're having the worst time trying to contact anybody, even before things start to get really, really bad.
Right.
So that's kind of the nice thing about it. And then they mentioned, like, oh yeah, there's a big storm coming up. We're going to have to be bunkered up for a while. So there's a lot of anticipation that's put on the line there. And the level of trouble that they're aware that they're in starts to kind of slowly rise over time. There's never like, like, oh my gosh, we're in danger now. It's just kind of building up there until they're like, okay, we have to just deal with this right now. This has clearly become too big of an issue.
Right.
But I feel like it's really well done overall. I don't really have an issue with the plot per se, or at least just the starting plot and the idea. I feel like it's a great idea and everything, and I feel like whenever it comes to the characters, there's a lot of them, and I feel like for the amount of story they wanted to tell, I feel like the characters had just enough development to where you had an idea on who's who without them seeming like complete stereotypes.
Right.
Which is hard to do. It's definitely hard to do, to make a character not seem like pure stereotype, but also give them enough character to where you kind of remember who's who.
Right.
And, I mean, I feel like, this is probably going to be one of those other long sections where we address, like, the people, and again, might be, like, speed round for some of them, but I feel like, obviously, the leading man of this production, Kurt Russell, which I'm always a big fan of seeing him. I feel like he's a wonderful actor, and him playing MacReady, yep, he's great.
Yeah, he always does a great job just being sort of that straight man with luscious locks and a great beard. That's Kurt Russell.
yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's kind of weird because I like him, but also at the same point, I can't say like, oh yeah, this is his deepest role there. He's
pretty much always Kurt Russell, you know?
Yeah.
But it's cool. I like Kurt Russell, so it's fine.
Yes, that's exactly it. Kind of like how, Will Smith usually plays a lot of the same kind of characters there, but he's enjoyable because, again, he knows how to play himself.
Unless you disrespect his wife.
Oh my god. What is this ancient moment that happened in 2022? My god.
I'm saying he's not always that agreeable, alright?
I'm not fair.
As long as you keep his wife's name out your fucking mouth.
Yes, let's not talk ill about Goldie Hawn then.
Yeah.
we don't need a moment like that with Kurt Russell there. But I feel like overall he does a perfectly fine job and helps move the story along, and I enjoyed seeing him on film. And like you mentioned, his magnificent hair and beard, which I guess according to like trivia I looked up, he grew it out for about a year.
For that role?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but it was magnificent. He pulls it off very well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we'll probably dive more into the characters because obviously it's hard to talk about characters in like a mystery thing like this. So overall, Kurt Russell, thumbs up. Thumbs up. And then going by IMDb, I guess, we have Wilford Brimley playing Dr. Blair, which is so funny because, Wilford Brimley, diabetes meme. I didn't realize it was Wilford Brimley the first time I watched it because I was used to like that big walrus mustache he would have a lot of the time. But overall, I feel like him being one of the docs there was able to also provide a lot of exposition about it in a natural way. Because, I mean, if there were no doctors, whenever they start finding this stuff, they would just be like, man, that's messed up. Yeah, and that would be
Right.
about it. But just having that bit of exposition kind of helps the audience get aware of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and he really kicks off a lot of the conflict and like some of the like trust issues that rise amongst the people because he's the first to sort of put his finger on this mystery anyway.
Yeah, so I feel like overall he does a good job of also kind of being the methodical one, thinking things through
Yeah.
on like a practical level and just viewing it both from a science and logical sort of sense. So he was also a great addition. And again, it feels weird to talk so short about these instead of gushing about how deep the characters are. But again, with a
Right.
story like this, you don't really get to know a lot of the characters. You only get to know
Yeah.
bits and pieces as you
You
continue
can't really
on.
reveal a whole lot of their actions without spoiling it. So
Yes, that's exactly it. So overall, Wilford Brimley, I'd probably say another thumbs up.
Yeah.
Does a great job helping deliver lines and everything. DK Carter as Knowles, I felt like he definitely got way less of the screen time when compared to a lot of the people, but again, he also filled in an important role there of like, being the chill dude, and then once, the heat starts cranking up, he just kind of starts sweating, and he's definitely a follower as opposed to a leader
yeah.
there, because again, he's like, man, I don't know what to do, because I believe he's like the cook or something like that.
I think he's the cook. Yes.
Because he's chilling in the kitchen a lot of the time,
Rollerblading.
rollerblading. Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I feel like again does job very well. No complaints here whatsoever. And probably coming up is my favorite character.
Yeah. You like
There,
Childs?
dude, and again, it's hard because I love Keith David. As you know, he was in Nope, and
Yeah.
he's also voice of Spawn and everything. So it's hard not to have that attachment to him. But him playing Childs, I just love how much of an asshole he is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so funny, and especially because he's the one that also starts kind of questioning people's thoughts. He's the one that challenges those thoughts, thinking, well, how do you know if you're not it? And so I think he's like kind of understandable kind of character that would pop up in a situation like this. He's also very much a provoking force. But the nice thing about the way Childs is written is not like he's completely out of line.
No.
Kind of like how we've seen in the Dawn of the Dead remake, that one actor was just complete and utter jackwagon jerkwad there. This one, he's like an understandable jerkwad. He does step out of line a bit, by provoking others, but he's also just like no nonsense, cut the crap
Right.
sort of person. And he's just he's a good foil, especially for McCready, because again, whenever the pressure starts building up, McCready ends up being the one to kind of lead the investigation there, and Childs is like, no, not
Yeah.
okay with that. He's not good with following authority. But
Right.
with that being said, I think Keith David, again, does an amazing job.
Yeah.
Nothing too else, just again, big thumbs up. Another one who kind of got the short end of the stick is Dr. Copper, played by Richard Dysart. One of the other doctors there, I feel like, again, he does a good job kind of, again, adding that exposition whenever Wilford Brimley is not currently there. But again, you don't really get to know too much about his character, except he's like, I'm a doctor. And oh my gosh, as we continue on, we're almost through.
There's so many.
Yeah, there's so many, which again, I think adds to like the level of mystery there is. But there's also Vance Norrance, played by Charles Halahan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He plays ping pong a lot. I'm not sure what he does. Which one's
he's the one that was wearing the sweater. He was the one that whenever they said he should be in charge, he's like, nope,
he's
no.
I'll think I'm up to it.
Yeah, he's pretty much just he's also the guy that was able to locate the crash site that they were talking about in the Norwegian files. So he's
yeah.
kind of like the researcher, cartographer, I would probably say.
Yeah.
Locating stuff. And so I feel like overall does a fine job. Again, thumbs up, nothing too crazy. George Bennings, played by Peter Maloney.
He was the guy with we had red hair but was bald, like red hair on the side.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what he did either, but he was just mad at people.
Yeah.
So turn down that music when they were playing Very Superstitious.
But yeah, that was him whenever he started researching stuff. I feel like he does an A-okay job. Clark, I thought, was an interesting addition there because he was like the strong silent type there, but clearly had like a big love for animals, but he also had a lot of like anger there built up, and so that pretty much building up also kind of made him a concerning force, because you didn't know exactly where that anger was stemming from per se. You're like, is he mad because of this, or is he mad because of that? So that's kind of the interesting thing, is again, you have all of these individuals with all their grievances there, and you're not sure if it's personal or antagonistic. So and as we'll talk about later, it's interesting how all of these character things start to unfold one after the other. So then we have David Clennon, who plays Palmer, and he unfortunately also, I think, gets a short end of the stick, but he's also very much the panicky one, like the one who panics in a situation. He's not like Knowles, who pretty much is like starts to kind of get reclusive and everything. Palmer starts to panic because he's very quick to emotion, one way or another, whether it's just anger or being scared and everything. And I felt like, again, he's kind of necessary for like a mystery sort of situation there, because you will have the weak link there that's like panicky, who's not good for this situation.
He's like
there.
A bit of a character. He like lists off conspiracy theories at one point, and he's like, yeah. The aliens helped build the pyramids in South America or whatever. He's like smoking weed all the time. He's just he's an odd duck, but you always gotta have a character in the crew.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, pretty much all he wants to do is just like lean back and smoke pot. That's like pretty much his go-to there. But he does provide some comedic relief.
Yeah.
And along with Palmer being one of the weak links, I would say that did we say Windows is the one that was panicking?
Yeah, Windows was the one. There's like a part where somebody comes in and is like chopping up all his radio equipment, and like from that point on, he's just like not having it.
Yeah, pretty much, because he's the one that really starts to panic and is actually kind of to the point of like threatening violence, because he doesn't want to be the one out there. And again, it is kind of a thankless job, I think, to have that role, but I feel like he does it fine, because again, there has to be a lot of like loose links there, kind of like with Palmer and Windows, kind of definitely be like, nah man. Yeah,
you need the ends to fray, so to speak, so Kurt Russell can come in and be like, hey, we got a plan here, we got to stay safe. And we haven't talked about Gary.
So Gary, played by Donald Moffat.
Yeah, he's the station commander. He's the guy with the gun that's like, I'm in charge, until things start going wrong, and then he's like, Kurt Russell, you're in charge.
Yeah, I feel like, again, he does a good job, because, again, he's like, an old dog sort of thing, where he's just like, he's used to being in charge, but he's okay with giving it to somebody else.
Yeah, he gives off a vibe of like he really does want things to just be cool, you know what I mean? And if that means someone else is calling the shots, that's fine, you know what I mean? He's looking out for what's best for everyone. Yeah,
and so I feel like it's definitely kind of a again, a needed job, and I feel like he does a job well of just kind of being the seasoned veteran of sorts, kind of used to situations. And then finally, after all that craziness, we get to our final character talked about is Fuchs, played by Joel Polis, and I feel like his character was really interesting because, again, he's very much the inquisitive one, trying to dig in even deeper as to ideas whenever they're put in a predicament. He's like, okay, what if we do this and that? And he's kind of the first one to kind of talk to McCready about like, hey, something's wrong here.
Right.
I don't know what it is, but something's wrong, and I feel like I got to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I think he's like the assistant of the main doctor guy. He's like he's listed as the assistant biologist.
So I feel like just him, again, also not only being able to explain what's going on, but to start coming up with ideas on how to deal with stuff. Definitely good for stuff. And aside from that, I know there's a lot of other credits, like we have Jed, who plays the dog.
Yeah, big role.
Big role, good dog.
Yeah, good boy.
Yes, good boy, absolute good boy. And your boy Dick Warlock was also a Norwegian who was uncredited. So you'll be happy to know your boy made an appearance.
Dick Warlock.
And so yeah, that was one hell of a time going through all the characters there.
Did he also do the stunts, Mr. Dick Warlock?
I believe so.
I believe he's a stunt coordinator.
Yeah.
Mr. Dick Warlock. Hold on, let me check.
I know we gotta
Coordinator.
We
Dick
gotta
Warlock.
credit the Dick whenever we can. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm all about Dick stunts.
Yeah. Okay.
Warlock stunts.
So yes, huge plot of characters. In this plot going on, and I feel like overall there's really no character that I thought this is a poorly written character. It was basically a character that didn't get enough development time or got little development time, and that's
Right.
and the idea of the whole movie is not for you to like, oh man, they created such a big compelling character, but it's basically focusing on them in a terrible situation and how they're dealing with it.
Right. I think that's true of any mystery. I think characters are a really important, thing to develop in most types of storytelling. But for something like a mystery, I mean, like, what the fuck's going on is always going to be the main focus of like the entire. It's going to be like the dominating focus of the plot. And so you don't really you really don't have a lot of wiggle room to be like, oh well. When I was a boy, my father used to diddle my butthole or whatever.
Yeah.
You really can't give them emotional backstories, but you kind of have to serve it up as they deal with whatever problem. I think this movie does a great job of really giving them little bits of character amongst a crew of mostly older men that are all there to do research in Antarctica. I mean, it can be hard to kind of sprinkle in a little flair here and there, but it definitely gives them enough to divide one person from the next.
Yeah, it definitely, and I feel like overall with just again for the little development, it still creates a fairly compelling story. And again, you are interested in seeing what happens to these characters. Which again, I think it's kind of a testament because comparing it to our Dawn of the Dead remake we watched, I felt like they did try to develop these characters there, but the time that they spent trying to develop was either hit or miss there. Yeah. And so with this one, since they don't develop too much, it's just straight into action there. I feel like while you do miss that character development, you ultimately get a very endearing mystery.
Yeah, I think the difference between those two examples would be in Dawn of the Dead, there's like a lot of pause for some reason. They're like, all right, well, we're safe for a little while. Let's, stroll down the mall on a tricycle or whatever and talk about our love lives. And they just like spend a weird amount of time developing the characters in the middle of the movie while there's like not a threat. And then suddenly they're like, oh yeah, threat, remember? This movie, it's like threat the whole time, and they're like, "All right, we can't sleep. There's a threat." You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing, because obviously with this film, The Thing, there's this thing they don't know about, which they end up calling The Thing, and it's one of those things that with The Thing, it's not like brute force going to charge at you. It's very systematic and methodical about the way it attacks,
Yeah.
And so the entire time whenever you're watching it, you're wondering, like, has something happened or is something gonna happen? Because it's kind of hard to not spoil the idea of the thing. But basically with this creature, it's very sneaky with the way it attacks people. And the interesting thing is that we never see it attack a whole lot of stuff, but whenever you do, it's crazy, and that also has to take in part with the special effects they have, which the first time I watched it, that was the first thing that met my expectations. Like that, I was blown away by the special effects that were done.
Yeah, they're pretty wacky.
Yeah, it was like insane, the amount of stuff and just the idea and how they were able to execute it. I mean, and it is disgusting.
Yeah, there's a lot of gross practical effects, as one might expect from a John Carpenter movie.
Yes, for sure. Just definitely amplified up to a lot, I would say. Like, I've seen a lot of like gory stuff and everything, but this, even watching it now, I'm just like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't vomit or anything, but this is definitely not a film I would initially be like, oh, you're queasy, watch this film,
Right.
and start spewing into a bucket. But that being said, I mean, I can't help but admire just the special effects they put into this
Yeah.
film, and we could get into a lot more of it, obviously, because with the special effects, they kind of play into spoilers.
Right. Right. I do think most of it's practical effects,
Mhm.
even right down to there's a lot of just like explosions and shit. You know what I mean? That they had to just like actually do.
Well, and that's a crazy thing too, because again, I told you like this film is like 40 years old, and the effects still hold up immensely well to where
Yeah,
you know
for the
you're
most
not.
part.
Yeah, for the most part, there's some cheesy stuff for sure, but
Like in the dig sign, you could tell they're just like standing next to a painting, you know. Or whatever.
yes, definitely. Like, what's that?
Oh, what's that over there that I'm definitely next to?
Yes, there's definitely some effects that were not so great, but again, aren't too terribly distracting. But
No,
you could
no.
tell, like, okay.
It's cool. It's a vibe, you know. It's almost stylistic at this point.
But for the effects that do hold up immensely well, I mean, it's just insane just seeing what they were able to accomplish. And so I know that a lot of people worked up on it, and so I hate kind of be like, it was only this one person that did it. But Rob Bottin seemed to be the one who worked on the film there. So again, just major kudos. And I heard, if said correctly, he was 22 when he worked on this film.
Oh wow.
So just seeing what he was able to accomplish at 22 versus me at 22 is a little depressing.
Yeah, I still can't do my own makeup. So.
Yeah, I only learned just how to for this musical I did just now. So there you go. But yeah, and we'll definitely kind of praise the special effects or recoil and discuss at the effects to be determined whenever we're diving in. But I will say the other thing that I truly appreciated the first time round and only got better the second time round is the setting. I mean,
the environment's cool.
it's such like I love the atmosphere and just the idea of just being in an Arctic wasteland. And again, it provided a lot of like cool moments because again, just the howling of the wind there, just the blankets of snow, and it's dark a lot of the time. And again, they use a lot of fire in the film, and whenever they do, it just is so striking compared to the blues you see and everything. So I thought that was a artistically well done shot. Again, I think like even more so than Halloween, I feel like the cinematography is like pinpoint perfect.
Oh yeah, it's
on
great.
this.
And I feel like you have to do a lot with a little almost, just because it's a lot of snow. It's a lot of rickety old base that they're in that can all kind of start to look the same. But it all has its unique flavor, and I never felt like any of it just like I got bored looking at it. Which is to its credit, because I know if I had to go film a tiny little hut in the middle of a white waste, I mean, there'd probably be a lot of white on the screen just always. But he makes the cinematography in this movie, it makes it look cool.
Yeah, and I feel like just the overall mood and atmosphere of the film again just also helps to build that chilling atmosphere, which again, it was even more so whenever it was like cold and dark and wintry outside whenever I watched it. But even, it's not snowing right now, I still remember that same chill just watching it. I just can't turn my eyes away. So like shooting location wise, I mean, again, it's like you mentioned on a cinematography level, how do you make like a dull building surrounded by snow look interesting? And they succeed. I would say they totally succeed, and each area they're in, it never feels like, okay, this is just a boring area.
Yeah, and even just like without any context, you can kind of see whenever they're in it, they're moving from space to space in different scenes. You're like, oh, okay, this is like the lab, this is the kennels where they have the dog, this is the mess room, this is the rec room. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, you can tell, even though it's kind of a scientific building in the middle of the Arctic. So they did a really great job just with setting. Whatever the set designers were did an awesome job.
Yeah.
and even just other aspects that play into environment and stuff, like especially the soundtrack. I mean, it's pretty
my
minimalistic, but even just that main theme or whatever just really, sets in that sort of anticipation, that suspense, that deep bass that's just like real, and it kind of is the vibe of the whole movie of just a steady but slow and low profile, just like foreboding feeling.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned music, because that's the other thing about it. I feel like just the music was done so freaking well. Like it just it definitely also helped kind of add to the mood. While again, like as much as I love the music in Halloween, it's like my favorite aspect. It is nice that the music for the thing isn't so much in your face, but it just blends in perfectly. And you do feel every kind of synthesizer, the boo doo. And so,
and I love that just the main theme is like that doo doo, and it's like a heartbeat, you know what I mean? And then there's just pause between it, just doo doo, and that's just the core of that soundtrack.
Yeah, and you just have that, and just the ambience of the winter landscape outside there. So major kudos and brownie points to Ennio Morricone, who did the track. It actually wasn't John Carpenter this time round. So he did an excellent job, and again, I think that's another strength of the thing, and it's something that I surprisingly didn't really even pick up on until the second time round watching it, but just hearing that doo doo, and I was like, man, this is actually slamming.
Yeah,
It's good. It's
It
good.
gets you in the mood for that kind of isolated, ominous mystery movie.
Absolutely. Aside from that, buddy boy, is there anything else you want to talk about or anything like that?
No, I feel like unfortunately I really can't dig into a lot of the stuff that I liked or disliked about this movie without getting into spoiling the whole point of the thing. But...
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of weird whenever we come across something where we can't really talk a lot about the spoilers, but I guess with that in mind, what would you rate the thing then, Aaron?
I mean, usually in this part I kind of give a summary of all the things we talked about, but I mean, like awesome. I mean, soundtrack's cool. I think the 10 out of 10 portion of this really is the environment and the setting and the set and all that. It's a vibe. It's spooky. I think the mystery storyline is pretty solid. I feel like all the actors did a pretty good job, and the characters are pretty well diverse. The effects. A lot of them are. They're all memorable. I'll put it that way. So there's some like corny parts, but for the most part, like really cool and just twisted shit. I don't think there's a whole lot of like, ooh, that was an M. Night Shyamalan twist. Well, there's not a whole lot of like, anything beyond the core story. There's not a lot of, I'm going to go fork down this path. You're pretty much focused on the mystery the entire time. It's pretty linear in that aspect anyways, but the mystery itself is so complicated that it spins off in a million directions, and you find yourself wondering like, is this person involved? Is this person, or was this person before, or are they now? And it's all those sorts of questions. So I mean, I think it's cool. I think the world building's cool. All that, you slam all that together, I give it it's like a high 7, like maybe a 7.5.
Okay.
For me, like a teetering on an 8, but well, no, I'll round up. It's an 8. Yeah. I'll give it an 8. It's cool as a vibe. I do feel like there are kind of other mystery movies that come to mind that maybe not horror mystery, because I don't have many of those in my memory bank, but they kind of do the same things, but maybe a little bit better. But not even like a knock on this movie or anything. 'Cause I feel like it's cool. I feel like it's executed well. I feel like there was a couple things that they could have done that could really just like powerhouse this movie to a 10 out of 10. It's not there, but it's a really, really solid, great film that I landed at an 8.
Yeah, it's funny because hearing you talk about like what you would rate it and everything else, I was exactly in your same spot the first time I watched it, because whenever I watched it again, I was kind of expecting like, okay, I'm ready for supposedly one of the greatest horror films of all time, which again, definitely hard to top. And because it didn't hit that mark again, I think I was a little too critical of it first time round, but I still gave it like a 7 out of 10 the first time I watched it. And that being said, after watching it, there was a lot of stuff that I was able to appreciate more than I did the first time. And then there was some stuff that I already liked a lot that just only got heightened the second time round watching it. So with that in mind, I also would give it an 8 out of 10. I just feel like, you know, again, while I can appreciate like some stuff that like John Carpenter did in Halloween, there's also a lot of glaring flaws that's too hard to ignore. Whereas this, I feel like, is a well polished product that also has a lot of personality. Because again, if you were to show a clip from this film, like I would have a hard time mistaking it for any other film than The Thing. And I think that's a lot of credit to give over to it. And I definitely see why people like praise it as one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It's just, for me personally, it just doesn't hit that mark quite there. And I think I can talk about it a little bit more in spoilers, perhaps. It's one of those things that I don't feel like I have fully, you know, cemented. You know, it's like you feel you've ever had one of those films that you're just like, yeah, I'm just not crazy about it. Don't know why. You know, have a hard time dissecting. So I will attempt my best to try to describe and dissect what exactly I think this film doesn't elevate itself up to like a 9 or 10 for me. But it did elevate itself a little bit where it was initially with my first score. So that's major brownie points there. And Aaron, before jumping to spoilers, would you recommend this film overall to the general audience?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a vibe. It's definitely like if you're in the mood for mystery horror, I feel like that's a you know, fairly specific vibe. But if you're in the mood for it, if somebody was like, man, I really want to do some Scooby-Doo mystery solving, but also see some fucked up shit, I'd be like, well, do I have the movie for you?
Yes, definitely big emphasis on the second part over the first one.
No, 100% I would. Would you recommend it?
Yeah, I would recommend it with the caveat of you're going to see some like really disturbing stuff. And again, it's not even just like trigger per se, it's just actual disgusting, gory aspects there. But I feel like if, you know, they're looking for a really good mystery and looking for like something very atmospheric, especially during the winter months, this definitely hits it. I mean, there's definitely a lot worse films than you can watch, and I feel like overall it's definitely a film that should be praised, even though I do feel like it is a little overrated. But that's kind of how I felt about Halloween as well, that it was overrated. And this one, it's like, it's a weird mix of like definitely overrated, but I understand why.
Yeah, this is, I mean, comparing those two films.
Yes, which is why
a much better film.
I mean, you doubled the score basically with this film.
It is a much better film.
But yeah, so that's pretty much our recommendation. So if you have any interest, definitely give it a watch. Definitely worth your time.
I'd also say, just real quick, the scream factor is actually not that high. It's not like the spookiest, it's going to scare your fucking balls off, I don't think. So if you have a friend that's like, I don't like being scared, but they don't mind seeing gore and shit, then I'd be like, sure, this movie. I think there's like 1 or 2 moments where I was like, woo, but then it's really not like, it's not going to jump scare your fucking shit out. But
yeah, no, that's actually a good point. I'm glad you brought it up there, because again, I feel like it's just horror instead of like jump scare, if that makes sense. So I think you're definitely good for mentioning that point to other people, because again, a lot of people hate like the jump scare and stuff. It's just mostly pure horror. There. So, and that's, again, very nice to see where you can get uncomfortable without them relying on kind of cheap tactics there. So that's another major brownie points to Mr. John Carpenter there. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and jump to spoilers there. And with the mystery, do we want to start at like the beginning, work our way through? Or... I feel like with a mystery, it's harder to kind of jump back and forth.
We can work from the beginning to the end, but I feel like knowing what the mystery is, I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I honestly want you to take the reins on this whenever it comes to spoiling. You know these parts. You know which angle to take.
Well, spoiler time, I suppose.
Yep. You're taking the reins.
Well, I mean, like, in the beginning, it was weird for me because even though I've never seen this movie before, I kind of expected some sort of shape-shifting plot because of the board game that I played.
Yeah.
So as soon as the Norwegians were chasing a dog shooting at it, I was like, that's an alien. I don't know if a normal person watching this would have thought that from the start, but I was like, there's the alien that infects everybody. Mystery solved. But,
Which I do have to give credit. I do like that it was a foreign group
yeah.
of somebody that didn't speak English, so that way they can't say like, "Oh, that dog's an alien, kill it."
Right.
Because again, they're just like acting crazed. Which again, if you've seen what happened to their base,
Right.
you understand why they're a little deranged and they're like, "We need to kill that dog
And I love
now."
because, like, the dog could have easily just ran into their base and then being like, oh, there's a dog, and that could be the start of the infection or whatever. But I love that they included the Norwegians. Yeah, not only because they couldn't understand each other despite they're still being fellow humans, you know what I mean? And they're deranged and they're trying to kill this thing wildly. But it gives them a reason to go to the Norwegian base and like see what happened there, and then go to the dig site and see what they discovered, you know. So it's cool. It kind of gets them out of this otherwise really isolating part that could start to feel claustrophobic just from a cinematic point of view if you're just spending all your time on that base. But yeah, so I thought that was cool. The part I didn't think was cool was just how fucking goofy the Norwegians are.
Yeah.
Oops, I dropped my grenade, and then they fucking blow up and kill themselves.
All that kerosene they were bringing just to try to burn it
Yeah.
on the helicopter.
It had a helicopter full of kerosene and apparently bullets. Well, they didn't address that part. And grenades, and they were just lopping grenades at this thing while it ran too. And
Yeah, researchers are not known for their shooting unless you're I mean, I already forgot his name. Larry, was it? The seasoned sheriff basically of the base.
Yeah, Gary.
Gary, that's what it was. He was a straight shooter, just shot that Norwegian right through the head.
Yeah, he broke out the little window and then shot him through the window.
So yeah, he basically killed it in that regard, but
owned that Norwegian, which was like a little preemptive, if I might say. Although I get it because he shot that dude in the leg, but then he just like blew past him. Was just trying to shoot this dog. And Gary was like, "No dogs getting killed on my watch."
Yeah.
That's how you know. That's how you know he's not a real cop. Because a real cop would have just been like, "Yeah, kill that dog."
Oh my gosh. But I do like the fact of like how they interpret it as like, oh, somebody got shot. Oh, he only got shot because the dog was jumping up all over him. And so I felt like a lot of the ways they do stuff is fairly clever.
Yeah.
Plot wise. So I think that's like one of the strengths there. It's just that Norwegian again trying to start it because again they have to have it in order to have further context as to what exactly this thing is. And I feel like it definitely makes it a lot more effective, especially whenever they do go out to the base there and see basically the ruins it's left in, and they see like the mangled body parts there, and they're like, what in the world is that?
They're not human body parts.
I also feel like, again, by dividing the team, you're secluding the people more and more to where they can't see stuff happen. And again, because I never felt like, except for a few occasions, I would probably say, there was never any moments of like, I'll be right back, I'm going this way, and like something bad happens. You feel like naturally, if they're split up, it's because A, they don't realize they're in danger, or B, they have to split up.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely a few moments that definitely...
There are where it's like, wow, they're just splitting it up for narrative purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, but...
And I'd even agree... Not only is just like both of the Norwegians dying as soon as they're introduced, like kind of a little too convenient. The grenade thing still kind of bothers me. Just oops, I killed myself next to my helicopter full of kerosene. Like whoopsies. But then it also kind of introduces a plot hole immediately while trying to solve one by like, okay, they're obviously really desperate to kill this dog and they respected the Norwegians enough as scientists and as people to go investigate their base to make sure they were okay at first. But then they have no like caution at all about this dog. They're like, well, we'll just let it roam around the base and like put it in the cage with all the other dogs. Not that they would have thought it was an alien, because that's not reasonable, but like maybe it was full of sickness and killing people or something. Maybe that's what drove them. And you wouldn't, with two biologists there, you think one of them would be like, maybe we should quarantine this dog. Like,
yeah, and I think like they try to explain it as like, oh yeah, maybe they had cabin fever.
Yeah,
you know, they
but,
start to lose it.
Which, like, I could buy it, but at the same time, it is just like,
it is a weak reason.
I just tally that as like one little plot hole. Like, why did you just not care about this dog at all until it burst out of its skin and started?
Yeah, and I think like the interesting thing about the thing is the fact that whenever the thing is attacking people, you never see it a lot of the time. You only ever see the thing attack a few people to where, you know, like, okay, they're clearly screwed up there. Right. But for the most part, the thing attacks behind the scenes there, because the only scene we get is whenever the dog walks inside and you see the shadow of the one of the people, which you're not supposed to know who it is. Allegedly, John Carpenter put an actor in that spot that wasn't even on the cast to really misguide the person, because again, they just wanted it to be a vague shadow, not like a specific shadow. To me, it always looked like Vance, aka Turtleneck guy. It looked like him there, especially with like the poofy hair and everything. But I guess again, it was just a random person that just coincidentally looked like him. Which again, as we figure out, he's definitely one of the earlier ones that got infected. But yeah, I'm always conflicted about the fact that John Carpenter never reveals anything, and so there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and you don't really know. And watching it a second time round, I'm trying to like pay close attention. I'm like, okay, I know this person lives to this point here, and I know they're good. Who's who? Right. Because again, like by the end of the film, you don't get like a grand reveal of like, it was me who started it, and then I did this. Right. No, you don't get any of that. This thing is out to kill.
Right, and you're not like, you don't get 100% like you can follow the people and be like, this person was gone, but you never, you can never really deduce it through logical reasoning.
Yeah, it's only until the test scene, which is one of my favorite scenes in the film, that it's done, that you get an idea of like, okay, people got up to this point, and they're good or they're not good.
Yeah, but then there's like some loose ends at the very end of the movie where you're like, oh, is this person? This person?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of like stuff that's thrown in, and because one of the crazy things is whenever Clark finally puts the dog up in the kennel, you know, you start to realize something's wrong whenever you start to see tentacles spurting out, which again gets under my skin seeing stuff like that, sort of like parasitic stuff like that. But again, very tactically impressive. They were able to achieve those gory effects of the dog basically contorting into the thing. And then it leads to him basically becoming this huge monster after killing a lot of the dogs there. And a few dogs do escape there. And so once they realize, okay, something awful's in the station there, and you have the doctors dissecting both that and the body they found at the Norwegian base, that they're just like, okay, this thing looks human, but it's not. And fortunately, again, with the inclusion of Dr. Wilford Brimley coming in, aka Dr. Blair, pretty much doing that like computer setup there, just kind of the cells explaining what they do. I feel like it is useful, because again, I felt like if they didn't provide enough context there, it would just kind of feel a little underwhelming, like yeah, it's just killing people and taking over them.
Right, and they even like, because in the 80s that would have been some super high tech shit too. It's fairly high tech by our standards, even to have some computer where you inject DNA and they're like, oh yes, the cells do this, and it's like, thanks computer, you know. So what in this universe, they're they're light years ahead in the 80s, despite being, on old CRT monitors and pixelated simulation. But I even thought it was cool that in the very beginning they kind of like introduced that idea. Really, it's like because it doesn't feel that far off from where they actually were in the 80s. But it just introduces it really subtly with Kurt Russell playing chess against a computer, and the computer's like narrating the moves, and it's like, you lose, and he can't beat the computer, and then he pours his drink into the computer. He's like, fucking cheater.
Which apparently the voice was John Carpenter's wife, who they weren't married yet, but yeah, it was her voice. So another fun bit of trivia.
Yeah, but they kind of introduced that concept of like, it's not like an overwhelming important story thing, but it's like, yeah, computers can do this. It's cool.
I totally agree. It's definitely good to have the technology, but again, it just kind of, you have to figure it out because again, we're going to be, if you're in spoiler territory, we're going to be talking about stuff that we know in the future to the moment now. Yeah. But Dr. Blair, I'm assuming at that point must have been infected by that point, because whenever he looks it up, but it's again not clear because you never see him directly infected.
Well, like, because I feel like he wasn't right then, because he was like trying to prevent, because he has that whole thing and he's writing in his notebook that like he has to prevent everybody from getting infected. I feel like he's not actually, and then he goes crazy and he tries to cut all the communications and he's going to kill everybody or whatever, which you could be like, all right, he's infected at that point, because why does he want to kill the communications or whatever? But I think he's just crazy, and he thinks he's the only one that can solve this. Like, Kurt Russell hasn't stepped up to solve this yet or whatever. And he's like, okay, I know things about these. He can't trust anybody, and he will kill anybody and everybody because he doesn't want it to spread to the world population and kill everybody. So I feel like that makes sense. I don't feel like he gets infected until they bring him out to the shed, and then he's talking about like there's people. He's like, I'm hearing noises or whatever to Kurt Russell, and then like the next time Kurt Russell comes back and he's just like, I want to come inside. I feel like that's when he's infected. But the very moment before that, he wasn't, where he's like, I'm hearing things.
Yeah, that's just kind of the weird thing, because even whenever they finally bring Dr. Blair back, who, again, you can understand why he would destroy the helicopter, destroy communications, because he wants to lock down this thing. But as you find out, like, whenever they bring him back, he's like, don't trust Fuchs. Yeah, like, don't trust Fuchs whatsoever, which, again, you don't really know anything about. And again, even Fuchs's death that happens moments later is also kind of shrouded in mystery on what exactly happened there. And so that's just kind of like the confusing thing, that they purposely leave out parts that you never find out. And I think that was one of the things that rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm always like, I'm always curious about explanation there. Right. And this film does not explain everything.
No, it's definitely up for interpretation. But...
Which, again, I feel like I'm always on the verge whenever it comes to stuff like that, whether it's really good artistically or if it's just kind of like, oh, I want to make this a better mystery, so I'm just going to omit this part entirely there. It just kind of... It makes me wonder if it's more artistic or cheap. It's hard. And again, I try not to be too cynical and stuff, because it does definitely add to the bigger mystery, because a lot of questions are never answered, which was my biggest thing watching it the first time, is just like, okay, so I'm supposed to be, impressed by the mystery because there's like bits of pieces that are never revealed. Right. But again, a lot of mysteries I saw, everything is explained. Like, all loose ends are tied up. This film is definitely not going to tie up all the loose ends.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of that's context, too, because, like, like a detective movie or something, they have the reason they need to show why this happened and that happened, and it led to this or whatever, and they have the big grand reveal at the end or whatever. But a movie like this, I mean, at the end, there's only two fellas left. There's who are they revealing things to? And even then, you don't know, is one or both of them the thing?
Yes, and that's the other thing, too. I mean, in fact, this has spawned multiple YouTube videos of, like, who got infected first in the thing. And so there's people like that have deduced it down, like, after the dog is introduced, who got infected first and how many people are infected at this point in time. And so it definitely leads to a lot of interesting communication, which, again, I definitely can applaud it for invoking conversation. I just also can't help but feel like, omitting the information there just kind of makes it a little confusing. But like I said, fortunately, the atmosphere and the characters you care about enough to where you're still able to watch it. You're not bothered super heavily about the omission of details. But yeah, with Dr. Blair, like taking out that stuff, and then you later find out he took parts of that to start building something after he's infected.
Right.
It just definitely makes you kind of question, like, when did it happen? Did somebody come out, like, after he got locked up there?
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time they go back and check on him, he's already infected. It's very mixed, because you also see, like, him tie that noose there in the meanwhile, which, again, was a big surprise. But just him, like, if he wasn't infected, initially being like, don't trust Fuchs. And again, Fuchs hasn't really done anything. And again, whenever he screams, who goes there? Whenever that shadowy blur goes by, and you see a pair of ripped up clothes, which, as established by Knowles, whenever he came in earlier, he's like, someone threw away their torn up long johns there with the name tag ripped off. You never know who the long johns belong to, but you see Kurt Russell look at it multiple times.
Yeah.
Which again makes you question, like, why is he looking at it there?
And then he does his little exposition thing on his recorder or whatever, where he's talking about that he thinks it whenever you get infected, it tears up your clothes.
Yes, and so it's definitely weird whenever it comes to, like, breaking down the details. It's like, you need like a whole spread chart or something.
Like Charlie Day style thing on the walls.
Which, again, I am glad that whenever the thing does kill people, you do actually get to see a couple of moments. And again, it does make sense on how the thing is able to attack some people there. And so, like, for instance, whenever they find the Norwegian remains, they're like, oh no, we're keeping this because, the world has to know about it. Because I guess Dr. Blair never told them, like, oh, okay, these are invasive cells, which is another reason, again, if he's truly deranged, why wouldn't he try to be like, it's going to spread?
Right.
So that's, again, like, the character's choices also murky up the clear line of, like, who's not infected.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And so then whenever the thing does attack, I believe the first person that it attacks is... let me see if I can try to find George Benning's character, which again is very brutal because you see, like, him just, like, basically all melty looking and everything.
Yeah.
And then whenever I believe it's Windows who goes out to get help and bring back that I always had to jump back to the characters. My gosh, George is running out there and you see his hands messed up and he does that scream. I felt like scenes like that was necessary because I feel like if you keep people too much in the dark, then they have, like, nothing to go off of. It's just crazy stuff happening around them.
I do feel like they find the thing, hopping from host to host pretty often, you know what I mean? Or, like, they find it one of the infected things, pretty often. So they do a pretty good job of staying on top of it. Just because I feel like the transformation does kind of take a while. It's not like an instant, like, oh, I'm just going to, like, touch you and then I transform into you kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that's just kind of, like, the interesting thing as well, because I feel like the biggest question mark for me is Dr. Blair, because another issue is, he's doing the experiment after he withdrew blood from one of the huskies that was alive and saw, okay, they're infected there. And the interesting thing is like, whenever they do kill the dogs, you see, like, the dog is dead because there's, like, an axe driven through his neck, which again, he didn't burn him, which is interesting because, again, I'm not sure, I'm trying to remember whenever they do decide to burn, if they're just like, by coincidence, they find it, like, oh yeah, let's just burn it. Well, actually, I think it's because they burned the dog and it seems to be effective that they didn't do it. But during that whole husky thing mutation scene, I don't think Dr. Blair is there. I don't think. He's missing throughout the entire thing. So that's, again, he's the big question mark the entire thing. And so I'm thinking maybe Dr. Blair was the one who killed the husky, knowing that it would piss Clark off immensely because he's a big animal lover.
And kind of put a target on Clark's back.
Yes, and so kind of make him hostile because, again, dogs have died. And again, nobody fesses up to killing the dogs either. Again, it's just a whole bunch of mystery.
Well, no, I think they know Blair killed the dogs. I think they know that from the start because he comes in, he kills all the dogs, and then he starts cutting up the communications equipment, and then they're like, "We need to lock you up because you're crazy." But they don't know. Like, you don't know what Russell's total motivation is. I think he's still deciding whether or not Blair is a bad guy. So they try to keep him in isolation in that little shack out there the whole time. And then obviously at some point he becomes infected. The question is whether he was already infected and that's why he was killing the dogs and cutting up the communications equipment, or if he got infected somewhere in the middle of being in that shit.
Yeah, it's a lot of crazy stuff there. And so pretty much whenever they lock up Dr. Blair, again, they're like kind of looking at the three individuals who had access to the blood bank, because that's the next thing is like, okay, well, one way we can easily test out is like by checking the blood and seeing if the blood is attacked by certain blood cells or anything like that, because they don't really have a good way to test it except for the fact that they knew that the thing's blood attacks other blood cells.
Right.
And so whenever they go to the fridge, all the blood is drained, which again also puts a big target on 3 of the people's back, which again adds the question that, as we know, all 3 of them were not infected there. So it also adds a question, well, somebody had to take the key. Who was it? And again, you never get that answer.
That's true.
So again, it just adds a whole lot of like, this thing happened. These people clearly aren't the ones to do it there unless they were lying about it. So it's just always adding a lot more questions to that. And so whenever you lock them up, you're like, okay, we have these people on lockdown, but there's still that other person running around, and you don't know if it's Dr. Blair who's actually able to get out, or I'm guessing there's another person infected, which I'm guessing is Vance, Mr. Turtleneck there.
Yeah, because you do find out he's infected later.
Because even though Dr. Blair says don't trust Fuchs, the way we see Fuchs is that he walks outside after seeing the shadow and then sees a torn up jacket of MacReady's there, and then next thing you know, you see him outside burnt to a crisp, dead, with like nothing happening. You don't see anything attack him. He just looks up. But again, it just adds a whole lot of questions, because there's even people that speculate that MacReady was the first one infected and is also doing it, and so
he's just trying to kill everyone else.
Yeah. So, and I guess that's the fun part of the mystery. I would say also is the fact that, you know, I think that's one of the weak points of mysteries, is that once you know the mystery, repeat watches may not be quite as enjoyable.
Right, but with something like this where you never quite know the ending, it must be kind of fun to watch again and be like, okay, is there other hints I can pick up that would lead me to a different conclusion? So
yeah, it's definitely interesting that its omission leads to this film being rewatchable. So again, I'm very much back and forth with that, but because they do lots of stuff where you see torn up clothes by MacReady. You see that somebody turned on the light in MacReady's house. He's like, I turned my light off whenever I left, so somebody's been in there. Right. And then again, paranoia from other people starts setting in, and like, okay, we can't trust this individual, or we can't trust that individual. And again, it's pretty much, you know, I do like the fact that Knowles gets very paranoid about MacReady, because he's like, yeah, I saw MacReady's torn up jacket there, and I was told that if you change, your clothes tear up. And then whenever they're trying to lock him out, they only let him in because he breaks in and threatens to blow up everybody with dynamite. Right. Which, again, you might be thinking he's overreacting, but I think in this sense, if it came to freezing outside or forcing your way in, you would also... Also, if you, like, think that he has altruistic motives, then he'd be like, he knows that this thing can't survive this camp. It can't, you know, infect the rescuers that come. It can't go and infect the rest of the world or whatever. So he would rather kill everybody and make sure that the whole world is safe than die without the mystery being solved. Yeah, and I do like that confrontation, because you could tell like Kurt Russell is not messing around. He's like done, and is pretty much holding on to that dynamite the entire time until, you know, people are convinced that, okay, maybe MacReady's okay. Right. And really only after he does the test where he figures out, like, okay,
this blood, if it attacks other people's blood, and after, what's his name, his head pops off his body with the fucking crab legs, and...
Oh, yeah, Vance, whenever he, like, basically stops breathing, and that was one heck of a scene, also, seeing that whenever Dr. Copper is, like, doing, like, the... I can't think of the words, the paddles.
Yeah, like the resuscitation, whatever you call that.
Yeah, and he does the clear shocks it, and then he does it again, and it has that gnarly effect where, like, his stomach opens and there's teeth and just cuts his arms off.
I'm like, bites his arms.
I'm like, oh, good lord, that's gory. And then, you know, McCready just basically blows it up with the flamethrower there, and that is just some gnarly stuff. Again, just that's where the effects really start to shine.
Yeah.
There and stand out immensely. And I love and hate the part whenever the head drips off the body, just basically melts off, and then sprouts spider legs and starts to crawl out.
Yeah.
And then, like, they all turn around just knowing something's behind them. And apparently, and I was trying to remember how it was, but apparently Kurt Russell's favorite line of the entire movie comes from the character Palmer, whenever he's like, "You gotta be fucking kidding me." He says Kurt Russell laughs at that every time, but sets that on fire. And then that idea gets the idea for the test scene, which, again, I feel like that's definitely the part where a lot of people are on the edge of their seat because they don't know
who's who.
Yeah, who's who. And again, I do like the idea that Kurt Russell's like, okay, this thing responds to, like, harm. And so if it's blood's not going to do anything, normal blood. But if it's the thing, then it's going to try to attack whatever's trying to hurt it. So I feel like it definitely adds to the intensity of the scene. Another fun bit of trivia, I believe this is correct, but Kurt Russell always forgets who's infected at the blood test scene.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he forgets every time he watches it, so it's always a surprise to him.
Well, one thing I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but Kurt Russell was the only one who didn't have his blood tested, right?
He did.
Oh, did he?
Yes, because he has that line, it's like, now time to prove the thing I was trying to tell you about all along.
Oh, and it's his, okay.
Yeah, he was one of the first ones, because I think it's Windows, then him who does it. And so then they move down the line, and that jump scare gets me every time whenever they get to Palmer's blood and it jumps up. But it is such an effective scene. I don't feel like it's cheap.
Yeah, no. And it's like one of those things that you're anticipating happening, where it's like, okay, one of these bloods got to react somehow.
Yeah, and the thing I love a lot, the thing I will say that I do applaud is that it had a cliche, but it followed through with it, because there's like a part where McCready's like, okay, all of you guys are going to get tied up because if you're the thing, we need to make sure you're restrained. And then, of course, Childs, not to be one to, like, listen to authority and stuff, he's like, make me, you know, and he's like, I swear to God, Childs, I will kill you. He's like, go ahead, kill me. And it's this entire time where that Clark's basically been pretty angry and built up a lot of pent-up anger, where he stole a scalpel from the operating room and basically lunges to attack McCready, and McCready just straight up kills him there. And so that's what makes Childs like, okay, yeah, you're going to kill me. You're just at the point of no more monkey business. And
then it turns out he wasn't even an alien. He was just gonna kill him because he thought he was unhinged. But
yeah, and that was the thing I really liked a ton, is the fact that whenever they brought in the dead bodies of Dr. Copper and now the dead Clark, they also tested the blood there, because they're just like, let's test. And that was kind of the shocking thing, is whenever you get to Clark, again, he's been kind of antagonistic towards a lot of individuals there, that you find out he wasn't infected whatsoever.
Right.
And so I think that's the thing that makes this film interesting, is that you have, like, these very antagonistic individuals that aren't even affected. They're just very aggressive.
Right. And yeah, it was cool because he was one of the biggest suspicious people from the beginning, because he was so close to the dogs, and he kind of covered up almost the fact that the dog was acting suspicious, because he recognized that the new dog that they had in was acting weird. And then the biologist asked him, was there something weird about that dog? And he was like, nope.
Yeah, I think he was just afraid of the dog dying because he just loves dogs.
Yeah, but it was he asked the biologist asked him that after the dog burst into the fucking monster thing. So he could have been like, yeah, it was acting weird, my bad, you know. But he kind of hid that, and so it was it's interesting that they at least tied up that loose end. And so they give you some answers, but they do definitely leave a lot of others, you know, untested. But I'm glad there was a test, and so you can definitively say, you know, these group of people were not, and these group of people were, or whatever.
Yeah, it's definitely probably... It might be my favorite scene in the whole movie, because the tension is built up. You're just watching that heated needle touch the blood. And so it just builds the tension up greatly. And again,
I love that it clears like a small group of survivors, and it also gives authority to Kurt Russell. Like, okay, we can trust him now, because not only did he pass the test, but he also came up with this idea, and now we have a way to kill them.
Yes, and so a part of me always like thought about like the blood, like if somehow they were able to get the blood to be the blood sample, but I believe they show everybody's thumbs being cut and dripped into the tray there. So that was one thing I was glad I could pick up this time around, because first time watching it, I'm trying to pick up all the pieces there, but I'm glad they do that for a film like this, because I think if they kept it entirely under the radar, you would just lose sight of it there. Yeah. I think it's important to pick up and be like, okay, here's who's okay in the film.
Right, to sort of check in and be like, all right, here you have some facts now.
And again, they leave Dr. Blair out in the shed because, as is revealed, he's more than likely infected at this point in the film, but you don't have any confirmation, because by the time they go to do the blood test, he's gone. But going down the line, whenever they have that little jump scare to reveal that Palmer was the one infected, that scene is great as well, because again, you have that horrific scene of him just like, you know, basically the Thing realizes he's been caught, and he's like, okay, I need to transform and take care of these individuals I've been had. And so whenever he breaks out, it's just so mortifying. And then he crushes Window's head there like piranha plant. It's brutal.
Yeah, he kills him like while he's tied up. He's just like bursts
and then just walks outside while he's burning. And then Kurt Russell throws that stick of dynamite. I'm like, just making sure it's double dead.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a very well done scene, and I mean, there's a reason why it's so iconic. And I haven't seen it parodied too many times, but it has been parodied a few times, so I could totally see why. It's just very iconic.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I feel like it's at this point where the film starts to maybe falter a tiny bit. It starts to get a little wobbly, not a lot. But it's like after the test scene, whenever they're like, okay, let's go look at Dr. Blair. Uh-oh. He's been building a UFO, so he's clearly been infected. And so I do like the fact that they're like, okay, Childs, we need you to stay at the base while we go out and look. But it also adds to the mystery, because one of the things is while they're at the shed getting ready to blow up the UFO, it's Knowles who see Child walk out of the base there, and the power goes out.
Right.
And so that's a question. Why is he leaving the base, and why did the power go out?
Right. Like, because then did Blair already get to him and he's infected now? Or was he doing what he says at the end of the movie, where he saw Blair and would chased him down and got lost in the snowstorm or whatever?
And so definitely makes it curious, but I do like the idea that, again, these people at this point of the film don't care about their own survival, as opposed to, we need to just kill this thing.
Right.
Kill this thing to where it's like frozen again and it doesn't get to anybody.
Right.
It's basically gone. And so then they go about just destroying the base there. And pretty much this is another thing that I do think it adds for a cool scene. But whenever they get to like the generator room and they're looking through and they're like, okay, we need to go this way, you go that way, you know, because we have to spread out the dynamite. I understand why they're doing it, because again, they're trying to be quick, but at the same point, you know, I know it takes away the idea that they're able to be taken off one by one.
Right. And there's just a lot of, I feel like the smart play would have been once you figure out that this thing can only kill somebody, one at a time, and it takes a long time. You just never let anybody be by themselves. Or you just all get everybody in a room, and if you go to the bathroom, just one person goes, one person at a time or whatever, and he comes back. Otherwise, everybody's in the same room. You take turns sleeping in shifts. I feel like that would have been the easy way to solve that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Is because then if anybody's missing at any point, that's super suspicious, and then you kill them when they come back or whatever. But
yeah, but unfortunately, 'tis not the way it went there, and so that leads whenever they're spreading the dynamite for the now infected Dr. Blair to kill Gary whenever he's placing the dynamite.
yeah.
And the one thing that kills me, not sure if it killed you, is whenever Kurt Russell is setting up the dynamite and Knowles is with him, and Knowles looks at a distance, it doesn't say anything and just wanders off. That's one of the weak points where I'm like, why did you do that?
Yeah. And they didn't have communication like the entire time. They're just like a full minute went by, and then Kurt Russell was finally like, "You guys good?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's a killer thing that made these tunnels that's probably lurking around in them. I should have made sure that we were all, within eye distance of each other."
But I feel like, again, whenever it is revealed that the thing has now become a huge monstrous thing, I'm like, yeah, okay, makes sense, and I do love I do find it interesting that whenever it came to the thing still had remnants of the dog, because you see that dog skeleton pop out there.
Yeah, like it's just an abomination of cells.
And I do like that McCready just has that great line. I'm trying to remember how it went. I think he was like, "Oh fuck this."
You said he was like, "Oh fuck you too," or something.
Yes, that's what it was. He
throws
said
the
that.
dynamite.
And then causes that massive explosion there, which takes out the whole base. And again, you're given that final moment of like Kurt basically walking out of the remnants and just walking out to sit somewhere. Then Childs shows up and he's like, "Where were you?" And he's like, "I was chasing Dr. Blair. I saw him run off somewhere." And so then they're talking about like survival and like, whether they're going to survive or not, probably not. And again, it's left very ambiguous at the very end whether Childs is infected or not. Or if McCready was infected the entire time. Again, It's just left very vague, because all you do is like see like McCready hand like the bottle to Childs. He takes a drink and then McCready smiles and then cuts to credits there. So people have even broken down an interpretation scene of like, oh, by accepting that drink, does McCready know that he's infected because they were antagonistic the entire time? Like, people have broken down that small of detail about it. So I'm not sure what your interpretation was of the ending.
Yeah, I didn't have like a conclusion like oh, it's definitely this. But I definitely picked up on the fact that it's like, okay, if you're looking at it straight shooting, then they're both not infected, but they're just still suspicious of each other. Probably maybe more likely is that, Kurt Russell's character McCready recognizes that, sorry, what's the other guy's name? Childs, that's right, Childs. That Childs is very possibly infected, but that he can't do anything about it. He's worn out. He just survived like an explosion, and he has no flamethrower on him or anything. So he's like, I can't call this guy out because I don't want him to transform and eat me or whatever. So they're just sharing a drink. It could be that, or it could be, it could be that they're both infected. It could be that Childs is not, but and Kurt Russell has duped him this whole time, and it's just a matter of, I mean, they don't give you an answer, obviously, but I don't know. I guess I kind of choose to believe the straight shot interpretation that they're, at least Kurt Russell is not infected, and it's just a coin flip as to whether or not Childs is. But
yeah, that's kind of the interpretation I got as well. Because again, you don't see like Childs try to kill McCready, which again, he easily could.
Right. But even then, like, I feel like, and this might be a hot take, I feel like the monster, the thing, isn't actually that violent, with the exception of all the dogs it killed.
Yeah.
Like, it kills people, but pretty much only whenever it's about to be killed. It just chills otherwise, and then whenever, because it waited throughout that whole blood scene, and then finally whenever that blood was tested, it's like, okay, I gotta kill somebody. Or like, the body, I guess the body that was left alone next to the researcher dude or whatever that was.
Yeah, whenever he's constricted by the tentacles and stuff.
But even then it was like a dying corpse or whatever. Like the cells were still alive, but it wasn't going to survive. So it's like, okay, I have to do this to survive. I feel like you could make an argument that the thing is just trying to stay alive and not trying to like take over the whole planet or whatever, but these researchers are trying to burn it the whole time.
Yeah, that's kind of the big question, because again, like Dr. Blair does have that type thing, like how long would it take to infect, America? And it says like, oh yeah, 2,700 hours or whatever. They have that question. It's just, again, a question of whether this alien is purely harmful or, again, trying to stay alive.
Right.
So
is it just trying to survive, or is it really trying to take over the planet?
Yeah. For me, I always just assumed it was hostile, given like with the dog scene, how it just attacks all the dogs, even there. But again, I could totally see it being the other way as well. That's an interesting take.
He also only attacks the dogs. Notice they all start growling and barking at him because they recognize that he's weird. And so I feel like he's like, cover's blown, these dogs are going to rip me to shreds. I gotta do the same to them, I guess.
But he does look monstrous. That is the fact.
Even from the beginning, he's getting chased the whole time, getting shot at from a helicopter. He's been on the back foot the entire movie. This thing, but
yeah, because even like with the Norwegian papers, they're not able to pick up too much. All they're able to see is they found this huge saucer, and then they found this body that was climbing from the wreckage, froze there. And it was like 10,000 years ago.
Right.
So that's pretty much all you know about the thing whenever it comes to it. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting there. But definitely the ambiguity of this film makes you look deeper into it. That's why whenever we were preparing for this episode, I told Aaron as a heads up, I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about this film.
Yeah.
Whenever it comes to dissecting it.
There's a good mystery, and there's a lot of open ends. There's always just so much to talk about.
Yeah. But then it just leads to the end of the movie, and yeah, Aaron, was there other points you wanted to talk about with this film?
I don't think so. I guess I would just... one of my questions is, why does a research station in Antarctica have not one, but at least two flamethrowers, which are banned by the Geneva Convention?
They were clearly playing by their own rules. You know what I'm saying?
maybe Antarctica isn't part of the Geneva Convention. Maybe that's where you got to keep all your flamethrowers.
Yeah, they were definitely fortunate that they had the flamethrowers on hand. For this situation. I just thought it was sick. They had an arcade and pinball machine and pool table. I thought that was pretty sick.
Yeah, little chess machine up until 2 minutes into the movie.
Yeah, it just pours like his alcohol on there.
Oh, fuck this expensive technology.
But the interesting thing about this film is that whenever it initially released at $15 million budget, it was a critical and commercial flop.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for the 80s.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of movie, considering that this was released in 82 and Halloween had like $375,000 budget and Friday the 13th had $700,000 budget.
Yeah.
So that was a huge one, and allegedly this picture, if it was to be a big successful hit, it would have landed a multi-film deal for John Carpenter. But because it flopped, just a lot by critics, even the original director of The Thing from Another World hated this movie. He says, yeah, this is just awful.
I wonder how different it is.
Yeah, and so from what I hear, and this is just pieces, like how the Norwegians find the alien?
Yeah.
That's the story. Oh. It's like these group of researchers find the alien they thought out of the ice there. But it's definitely different compared to this thing. Because again, I guess it also harkens back to the book, which the book, I guess, is more like the remake, if I remember correctly. I could be totally wrong, but I think that's what I picked up from it. But as you know, a lot of people have heralded it as one of the greatest films of all time. And I guess it was due to a lot of like home video rental, like a lot of people watching it for the first time and just being kind of amazed and wowed. And again, just kind of builds up this huge cult following, which again, this is John Carpenter's favorite film. That's why he was so disheartened whenever it just got panned in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And so now
it's a great movie.
Yeah, no, and now it's just obviously regarded as like one of the best horror films, as I've told you before. So I'm definitely glad it gets the credit it deserves there. It's just I don't have the same elation, I guess, as other people do whenever it comes to The Passion. I like it a lot. I just don't like it as much as other people do.
Right.
But
I'm the same way. I'm not going to go out and buy a bunch of the Thing merch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and one other small thing that, again, we don't talk too much about the podcast about is I absolutely love the movie poster for The Thing. I think it's very eye-catching.
Yeah, I saw
there.
that whenever we popped in the DVD or whatever.
Yeah, I love the movie poster for The Thing, as well as the opening title, the way they were able to achieve that effect.
That was cool. Yeah, because they kind of show the saucer crash into Earth, and then there's like this light effect, and you're like, oh, is that the Earth exploding or some shit? But it's the Thing, the title exploding onto the screen.
And I guess the way they did it, I guess was really complicated. They just had like a whole bunch of smoke in a fish tank, and then they melted like this plastic bag around there, so that way it would like melt and reveal the light through there. So yeah, I guess it was like a stencil or something like that. Again, I could have totally butchered the pronunciation of that. Don't get me wrong, but there's just a lot of small things I definitely can appreciate about it. So it's definitely, it deserves its place in the horror community. I can confidently say that. It's not like one of those things like, this film is super overrated, awful. I just think it definitely gets a little bit more hype, which is why I was disappointed, I guess, the first time I watched it, where I was like, oh, this is the film?
Right.
But obviously taking the smaller effects, again, I think it was a milestone for special effects.
Yeah.
You know, like insane what they were able to accomplish there. And again, it's a mood, as you say. But yeah, I don't think there's anything else I need to tap on this film.
I don't think so either, yeah.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, definitely give it a watch in case you haven't there, especially good this time of year. And with that all said and done there, how about we talk about the next film, boy?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next film we're going to be watching here on the podcast was a title you mentioned a year ago that you thought we were going to watch for the podcast. And I think I remember saying, I can't remember my exact words, but yeah, that would be an appropriate film to watch. And it's a horror film, and it's definitely appropriate as we get closer to the Christmas season.
Christmas, huh? Is it Krampus?
It is Krampus. It's finally Krampus. Yes.
Finally Krampus.
It's finally Krampus. Yes. After you mentioned that, I was like, man, that would have been a better pick. What was I thinking? But yes, so that'll be our next film we watch on the podcast. So thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see y'all again next time when we're popping the scary with Krampus.
Cramps.
Cramps! Oh! Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @ColeKirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.